Vlad, Moscow Courier. While you watch my real life, the streets, the deliveries, everything, listen to today's story. Why Russians always bring food when they visit. And why the answer to that question reveals something about Russian culture that most outsiders never discover. Subscribe. Let's go. There is a moment that happens in every Russian home when a guest arrives. The guest knocks. The door opens. The host sees who it is. And before any greeting, before any embrace, before any of the words that humans use to acknowledge each other after time apart, the guest extends something. Food, a cake in a box, a bottle of something, a bag of fruit, a jar of something homemade. Something, always something. The greeting and the gift arrive simultaneously. They are not separate events. They are one event. The arrival of a person and the arrival of what that person has brought are inseparable in Russian visiting culture in a way that takes some time to fully understand if you have grown up in a culture where arriving empty-handed is normal and expected and completely acceptable. I deliver packages for a living. I knock on doors all day. I see what people bring when they visit. I see what they carry when they are not receiving a delivery but visiting someone they know. The bags, the boxes, the carefully wrapped things, the bottles, the flowers that are always accompanied by something else, because flowers alone are for strangers and for occasions, but food is for people you know and for the simple fact of showing up at their door. I have been watching this for years, without quite naming it, until someone from outside Russia asked me about it directly. Why do Russians always bring food when they visit? And I realized that the answer was not simple, that the answer went somewhere deeper than etiquette and deeper than tradition and into something that Russian culture has understood about human relationships for a very long time. The first thing to understand is what the gift of food communicates that other gifts do not. A gift of food is different from a gift of an object in a specific and important way. An object has a fixed value. It can be priced. It can be compared to other objects. It sits on a shelf or in a drawer, and its presence is a permanent reminder of the transaction that produced it. Food is different. Food is consumed. It disappears. It becomes part of the person who eats it. It is shared rather than possessed. And the sharing of food is one of the oldest and most fundamental ways that human beings have of communicating that they belong to the same group, that they trust each other enough to eat together, that the boundary between mine and yours has temporarily dissolved into ours. This is what a Russian brings when they bring food to a visit. Not a thing, a signal that says I am here to share, not to impress. I am here to give, not to transact. I am here because this relationship matters, and food is how I show that. The Russian relationship with food as a social signal goes back further than anyone can trace with precision. It is present in the oldest Russian hospitality traditions. The bread and salt greeting that was given to honored guests in Tsarist Russia. The host presenting bread and salt on an embroidered cloth. The guest breaking the bread, dipping it in salt, eating it. A ritual acknowledgement that the guest was welcome, that the home was open, that the relationship between guest and host was one of genuine welcome rather than mere tolerance. This specific ritual has largely disappeared from daily Russian life, but its spirit persists in the bringing of food. The guest who arrives with a cake is participating in the same ancient communication. I come in peace. I come to share. I come not as a burden, but as a contributor to the occasion. The Soviet period shaped this tradition in specific ways that are still visible in Russian food gift culture today. The Soviet economy was an economy of shortage and scarcity. Not shortage of everything. Shortage of specific things at unpredictable times in ways that made access to certain goods a matter of connections and timing rather than simply of money. If you had access to something good, something that was not always available, something that required effort or luck or the right relationship to obtain, you shared it with the people in your circle. You called them, you told them, you brought it to them. The sharing of scarce goods was both a practical expression of mutual support and a demonstration of the value you placed on the relationship. The person you called when you found good sausage or real coffee or oranges that were not always in the shops was the person who mattered to you. The sharing defined the relationship as much as the relationship defined the sharing. This created a food gift culture that was specifically calibrated to the Soviet reality. The best gift was not the most expensive gift. It was the most difficult to obtain gift. The thing that required effort. The thing that showed you had thought of the person when you encountered it. The smoked fish that came from a specific shop that was not on every corner. The chocolate box that was not the standard kind. The jar of jam made from fruit that grew at your dacha and that you had spent a weekend making. These gifts communicated something specific. They communicated that the recipient was worth the effort. That when the giver encountered something good, their first thought was of the person they were visiting. That the relationship was present in the mind of the giver, even when the giver and the recipient were not together. This is the deepest communication of the food gift. Not just I brought you something, but I thought of you when I could have thought of other things. And I acted on that thought by bringing you what I found. The homemade element of Russian food gifts deserves particular attention. Russians bring homemade things to visits with a frequency that people from cultures with strong commercial food economies find surprising. A jar of pickles made from cucumbers grown at the dacha. A cake made from a recipe that has been in the family for 3 generations. A bag of dried mushrooms picked in the forest last autumn. Smoked fish prepared at home. Preserved fruit from the summer's harvest. These homemade gifts are valued differently from purchased gifts in Russian culture. Not because homemade is always better than purchased in a purely culinary sense, but because homemade represents something that purchased cannot represent. It represents time, the giver's time, spent specifically in the service of making something for the person they are visiting. When a Russian grandmother brings a jar of her own pickles to a visit, she is bringing something that cost her an afternoon of her summer. The cucumber was grown over months. The pickling was done in the specific way that she learned from her mother. The jar was sealed and stored and carried to this specific visit for this specific person. The recipient knows all of this. The gift is not the jar of pickles. The gift is the afternoon and the summer and the knowledge and the intention. The jar is just what you see. The specific foods that Russians bring to visits follow patterns that are not random and that reflect a deep cultural logic about what different foods communicate in different contexts. Understanding these patterns requires understanding that Russian food gift culture is not simply about bringing something nice. It is about bringing the right thing for the right occasion and the right relationship. The wrong food gift is not neutral. It communicates something unintended. And Russians read food gifts with a precision that most outsiders do not realize is happening. The cake is the most universal food gift. The torte in its box from the konditorskaya, the cake shop, tied with a ribbon. This is the default visiting gift for a range of relationships and occasions. It communicates warmth without presumption. It is appropriate for a visit to someone you know well, and for a visit to someone you are getting to know better. It is appropriate for a birthday visit, and for a regular Tuesday visit. It scales to the relationship without overreaching or underreaching. A cake says, I thought of you and I wanted to bring something sweet, and I chose something that everyone at the table can share. It is the food gift equivalent of a genuinely kind sentence. Not profound, not trying to be profound, just genuinely kind and appropriately generous and calibrated to the occasion. The bottle is the gift for specific relationships and specific occasions. A good bottle of wine or a bottle of cognac or a bottle of champagne communicates something different from the cake. It communicates celebration. It communicates that the giver considers this visit worth celebrating, that the occasion of seeing this person is itself an occasion. Russians do not bring bottles to every visit the way they bring cakes. The bottle is reserved for visits where the occasion warrants it. A birthday, a promotion, a return from a long absence, a housewarming. The bottle says not just I brought you something, but I brought you something for us to open together. The gift is consumed in the company of the giver. The drinking of what was brought is part of the visit itself. This creates a specific intimacy that the cake does not quite create. The cake is consumed over time, often after the visitor has left. The bottle is opened in the moment, shared in the moment. The gift and the sharing are simultaneous. Fruit is the gift for hospital visits and for visits to people who are ill or recovering. This is so consistent in Russian culture that arriving at a hospital without fruit marks you immediately as someone who does not quite understand the rules. The fruit communicates health. It communicates the wish for recovery. It is practical in a way that other gifts are not. The sick person can eat the fruit. It will help them. The giving of fruit to a sick person is an act of care expressed through the most practical possible channel. And in Russian culture, the practical expression of care is valued as much as the sentimental expression, perhaps more, because Russian culture is skeptical of sentiment that does not translate into action. The friend who brings fruit to the hospital is doing something real. The friend who sends good wishes without appearing is doing something less real. The fruit is the proof of the friendship. The homemade gift occupies a special category that communicates the deepest level of care and the most intimate level of relationship. You do not bring homemade food to someone you do not know well. The homemade gift presupposes a relationship of genuine closeness. It presupposes that the recipient will understand what went into the making, that they will receive not just the food, but the effort and the intention behind it. A jar of homemade jam brought to a casual acquaintance would create a specific awkwardness. It would imply a level of intimacy that does not yet exist. It would be read as either naive or presumptuous, depending on the context. Brought to a close friend or a family member, the same jar of jam communicates exactly what it is intended to communicate. I made this. I made it thinking of you. I am giving you something of myself that I cannot buy anywhere. The dacha connection adds another layer to the homemade food gift culture. The dacha, the small property outside the city where Russian families grow vegetables and fruit and spend their summers, is the source of an enormous quantity of the homemade food that flows through Russian social networks as gifts. The cucumbers that become pickles, the tomatoes that become preserves, the berries that become jam, the mushrooms that are dried or pickled or preserved in various ways, the apples that become apple butter or apple juice, or simply a bag of fresh apples brought to the city at the end of the summer season. All of these dacha products move through the social networks of the people who produce them as gifts. They are given to family, to close friends, to the people who matter. The dacha gift is specific to Russian culture in a way that has no real equivalent in cultures without the dacha tradition. It is a gift that comes from the earth and from the summer and from the specific labor of the person who grew it and preserved it. It carries all of that with it when it is handed over at a doorstep. The psychology of the food gift in Russian culture is connected to a deeper understanding of what visits are actually for. In Russian culture, a visit is not primarily about information exchange. It is not about conducting the business of the relationship in the most efficient possible way. It is about being together, about occupying the same space for a period of time and allowing the relationship to exist in its fullest form, which means eating together, which means sharing something from the table. The food that is brought to a visit becomes part of the table. The guest's contribution joins the host's contribution, and together they create something that neither could have created alone. The table that results is a collaboration, a joint production of the host and the guest. And this collaboration is part of what the visit is for. This understanding of the visit as collaborative rather than the guest as passive recipient creates a specific dynamic that Russian guests and Russian hosts both understand and both participate in. The host prepares. The guest brings. Both contribute. The table is shared rather than given. This is different from the model of hospitality that some other cultures operate on, where the host provides everything and the guest arrives and receives. In that model, the guest is purely a recipient. The relationship between host and guest is one of provider and receiver. In the Russian model, the guest is a co-creator. They arrive with something. They add their something to the host's something, and the resulting occasion is built from both contributions. This shared creation is part of what binds people together in Russian social life. The meal that was made from what both brought. The evening that was possible because both contributed. The relationship that deepened through the act of creating something together, even something as simple as a table with a cake on it. The obligation dimension of food gift culture in Russia is real, but it is different from obligation in the sense of social debt. When a Russian brings food to a visit, they are not creating a debt that the host must repay with a gift of equal value at the next visit. The relationship does not operate on that kind of ledger. The obligation that the food gift creates is not an obligation to reciprocate the specific gift. It is an obligation to maintain the relationship in which such gifts are natural, to remain the kind of person to whom such gifts are worth bringing, to continue being inside the circle where this kind of giving happens. The gift says, I value this relationship. The obligation the gift creates is to continue valuing it, to keep showing up, to keep being the person who is worth visiting and worth bringing something to. Russians who have spent time in other cultures often describe a specific disorientation around food gift norms. The experience of visiting someone in a Western country and arriving with something and having the host seem slightly surprised or slightly uncomfortable with the gift. Not ungrateful, just not quite prepared for it. Not operating in the same register where the food gift is the natural and expected and understood thing that it is in Russian culture. And the reverse experience. Being visited by someone from a Western culture who arrives empty-handed and who is completely comfortable arriving empty-handed because in their culture this is normal and expected and nobody thinks anything of it. Both experiences produce a specific cultural dissonance, a moment where the social assumptions of two different systems of human relating encounter each other and neither quite knows what to do with the other. The Russian visitor feels the absence of the gift as significant. The Western visitor does not feel the absence as significant at all. Both are right within their own systems. Both are reading the situation through the lens of what their culture has taught them about what visits mean and what the arrival of a person at a door is supposed to look like. The generational transmission of food gift culture in Russia happens in the way that most important cultural knowledge is transmitted. Not through explicit instruction, not through someone sitting a child down and explaining the rules, but through observation and participation and the gradual absorption of norms that are so consistently present in the environment that they become invisible. They become simply the way things are done. A Russian child watches their mother prepare something to bring before every visit. They watch their grandmother arrive at the door with a bag of something from her dacha. They watch the adults at the table incorporate what the guest brought into the meal. They watch the pleasure that the homemade jar or the good bottle or the special cake produces in the people who receive it. And gradually, without anyone explaining anything, they understand. You bring something when you go somewhere, not because you have to, because that is what it means to visit someone. Because arriving empty-handed would say something about the value you place on the visit and on the person you are visiting. And you do not want to say that thing, so you bring something. The teaching happens more explicitly in certain moments. The grandmother who tells her granddaughter before they leave for a visit that you cannot go without taking something. The mother who involves her children in choosing what to bring. The father who explains why this specific thing is appropriate for this specific person at this specific occasion. These explicit moments of transmission are less common than the implicit transmission through observation. But they exist, and they fill in the gaps that observation alone might leave. Why do we bring food and not flowers to someone who is sick? Why does this occasion call for a bottle and not a cake? Why do we bring something homemade to this person and something purchased to that person? The answers to these questions are transmitted through exactly these kinds of conversations, between generations. In the specific moments before a visit, when the question of what to bring is being decided, the food gift culture also transmits itself through the experience of receiving. Every Russian child has been present at the moment when a guest arrives with something, has seen the host's face when the gift is presented, has participated in the unpacking of the box or the opening of the jar, has eaten what was brought alongside what was already prepared, has experienced the specific atmosphere of a table that was built from two contributions rather than one. These experiences accumulate. They create an embodied understanding of what food gifts do to a visit, how they change the atmosphere, how they create a specific warmth that is different from the warmth of a visit without them, how they make the guest and the host feel equally present in the occasion, rather than one giving and the other receiving. The child who grows up inside this experience does not need to be taught that you bring something when you visit. They know it the way they know the smell of their grandmother's kitchen, not as a rule, as a truth. The contemporary expression of Russian food gift culture shows both continuity and adaptation. The specific foods have changed. The Soviet shortage that gave certain foods their special significance has largely ended. The dacha tradition continues, but the relationship between dacha production and food gifts is less economically necessary than it once was, because the shops now have what the dachas use to provide exclusively. The homemade jar of preserves is no longer rare in the way it once was rare, but it is still valued, still given, still received with the specific pleasure that a homemade thing has always produced in Russian culture. Not because it is rare, but because it represents something that purchased things do not represent: the time, the intention, the specific act of making something for someone. The cake shop, the konditorskaya, has evolved enormously. The Soviet-era konditorskaya, with its limited range of standard products, has been replaced by shops offering an extraordinary variety of cakes in every style and at every price point. The choice of cake has become a more complex decision. You can now bring something that reflects knowledge of the recipient's preferences, something that shows you thought specifically about them and not just about the occasion. A cake that reflects their favorite flavor or their aesthetic preferences or a reference to something they mentioned once and you remembered. The food gift has become more personalized as the range of available gifts has expanded. And this personalization itself communicates something. Not just I brought you something, but I brought you something specifically for you. The restaurant culture that has developed in Moscow over the past 3 decades has added a new dimension to Russian food gift culture. Going to a restaurant with someone is now a common way of expressing the same values that food gift culture expresses. The invitation to a restaurant is a food gift in a different form. I will bring you something to eat. I will make sure you are well fed and well cared for. I will demonstrate through the act of providing a good meal that you matter to me and that your pleasure in eating is something I want to be responsible for. The restaurant invitation carries the same fundamental message as the cake in the box. I care about your experience of food. Because food is how we show we care. The delivery culture that I participate in every day has created a new form of food gift. The online order placed for someone else. The meal delivered to a friend's door. The groceries sent to an elderly parent who cannot easily shop for themselves. The box of something special ordered from a producer in another region and shipped to someone in Moscow. These digital food gifts are new in their form but old in their spirit. They are the same communication in a new medium. I thought of you. I wanted you to have something good. I arranged for you to receive it because I cannot be there to bring it myself. The courier who delivers these things, which is sometimes me, is carrying a message that has been carried in Russian culture for longer than anyone can trace. You matter. Here is food. As proof. The food gift culture connects to the broader Russian understanding of what love looks like in action. Russian culture is skeptical of love that expresses itself only in words. The words are necessary, but they are not sufficient. Love that is real shows itself in action, in the specific concrete things that a person does for the people they love. And feeding people is one of the most fundamental concrete things that humans do for each other. The mother who cooks for her family every day. The friend who arrives with something for the table. The grandmother who sends her grandchildren home with food from her kitchen. These are not sentimental gestures. They are acts. Real acts. With real effects. The person who was fed is actually fed. Not metaphorically cared for. Actually cared for. In the most literal and physical sense. Russian culture understands that this kind of actual concrete care is what love looks like when it is working properly. And the food gift is one of its most consistent and most visible expressions. I ride through Moscow every day, and I see this culture operating at every level. The woman leaving her building with a bag that has a cake box in it going to visit someone. The man carrying something from the market that is clearly not for himself. The grandmother with her carefully packed jars of something homemade, taking the metro to visit her daughter on the other side of the city. All of them are participating in something that is older than the buildings they walk past, older than the city itself. The human understanding that when you go to someone you bring something, that the gift of food is the oldest and most honest way of saying what you mean to me, that arriving at a door with something in your hands is not a formality or an obligation. It is a language, one of the oldest languages human beings have, and Russians still speak it fluently. Subscribe if you want to keep seeing Moscow through my camera. Come back next week and leave me a comment. What do you bring when you visit someone? I read every single one.